In 1950, Venezuela had a higher per capita income than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. Let that sink in. A country sitting on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. A country where immigrants from Europe flocked by the hundreds of thousands looking for opportunity. A country that was, by every measurable standard, one of the wealthiest nations on earth. And then they destroyed it all in less than 2 generations. How do you take a country that rich and turn it into one where people eat from garbage trucks? How do you go from the envy of Latin America to a nation where the average person lost 26 pounds in a single year because there was no food? Oil corruption collapse. This isn't just a story about Venezuela. This is a warning, a pattern that has repeated throughout history. And if you think it can't happen where you live, you haven't been paying attention. Today, we're going to trace every step of Venezuela's fall, from golden age to humanitarian catastrophe, because the playbook that destroyed Venezuela is being used right now in countries you'd never suspect. The golden age. Let's go back to the beginning. 1914. A massive oil geyser erupts at Mean Grande in western Venezuela. It blows for 9 straight days. And just like that, a poor agricultural nation discovers it's sitting on a sea of black gold. By the 1920s, Venezuela becomes the world's largest oil exporter. Money floods in. The currency, the bolivar, becomes one of the strongest on earth. Venezuela is a country where the streets are paved with oil money, and the future seems limitless. Through the 1950s and 60s, Caracas transforms into a modern metropolis. Skyscrapers rise. Highways are built that rival anything in the United States. The Caracas subway system becomes a symbol of progress. European immigrants, particularly from Spain, Portugal, and Italy, arrive by the boatload. They're not fleeing to poverty. They're running from it. Venezuela's GDP per capita in 1950 was the 4th highest in the world. 4th, higher than most of Western Europe, still rebuilding from war. Venezuela was the American dream of South America. Doctors, engineers, architects, all came seeking fortune in a land that seemed to have no ceiling. But here's what nobody talks about. Even during the Golden Age, the seeds of destruction were already planted, because all that wealth came from one single source. And when your entire economy depends on one thing, you're not rich. You're vulnerable. But the vulnerability went deeper than just oil dependency. The oil curse. Economists call it the resource curse, or the paradox of plenty. Countries with massive natural resources often end up worse than countries with none. Sounds insane, right? But look at the pattern. Nigeria, oil-rich, desperately poor. Iraq, oil-rich, decades of war. Libya, oil-rich, failed state. And Venezuela, the poster child for how oil wealth can destroy a nation from the inside out. Here's why it happens. When a government can fund itself entirely through oil revenue, it doesn't need productive citizens. It doesn't need entrepreneurs, innovators, or a diverse economy. It just needs the oil to keep flowing. Venezuela stopped investing in agriculture, stopped developing manufacturing, stopped building an economy that could survive without petroleum. By the 1970s, oil accounted for over 90% of export revenue. 90%. One product, one price on one global market that you don't control. If you're starting to see the pattern here, hit like and subscribe to keep exposing what they hide. Because what comes next connects all the dots. Oil is the devil's excrement. That quote came from one of the founders of OPEC, a Venezuelan. He saw it coming decades before the collapse. He warned his own country. They didn't listen. And the reason they didn't listen leads us to something even more dangerous than oil dependency. Spending spree. 1973. The OPEC oil embargo hits. Oil prices quadruple overnight. And Venezuela's President Carlos Andrés Pérez looks at those numbers and sees infinite money. He launches a program called La Gran Venezuela, the Great Venezuela. Massive government spending. Nationalization of the entire oil industry. Steel, aluminum, everything gets swallowed by the state. Spend, borrow, repeat. The government hires hundreds of thousands of people for state jobs, not because they need them, because it buys votes, subsidies on everything. Gasoline practically free, food prices controlled, electricity almost given away. It felt like paradise. But here's what they don't tell you in the history books. The spending was wildly exceeding even the oil revenue. Venezuela started borrowing, heavily. International banks were happy to lend because, well, they've got all that oil, right? What could go wrong? They were spending money they hadn't earned on promises they couldn't keep. By the early 1980s, oil prices dropped, and suddenly, a country addicted to spending had no money to spend. The bolivar, that mighty currency, was devalued on February 18th, 1983, a day Venezuelans still call Black Friday. Black Friday, it was the first crack, the first visible sign that the model was broken. But instead of fixing the model, the next generation of leaders doubled down on it. Corruption machine. Here's something the mainstream narrative conveniently skips. Venezuela didn't start with Chavez. The corruption, the mismanagement, the institutional rot that was decades in the making. The two major political parties, AD and COPI, ran Venezuela like a cartel from 1958 to 1998. They called it the Punto Fijo Pact, a power-sharing agreement where they basically took turns looting the country. Democracy on the surface, theft underneath. Oil revenue flowed into the pockets of political elites. Infrastructure crumbled, schools deteriorated, hospitals ran out of supplies. The middle class that had been the pride of Venezuela started shrinking. Poverty climbed from 20% in 1980 to over 60% by 1996. Let me say that again. 60% poverty in one of the most oil-rich nations on the planet. How? Because the money was being stolen. Billions disappeared into offshore accounts. Government contracts went to friends and family. State companies became employment programs for political loyalists, not productive enterprises. In a corrupt country, the oil doesn't belong to the people. It belongs to whoever controls the pump. The people knew they were being robbed. They could see it, feel it, and they were furious. That fury created the perfect conditions for someone to come along and promise to burn the whole system down. And that someone was already waiting in the wings. Chavez rises. February 4th, 1992. A young army lieutenant colonel named Hugo Chavez leads a military coup against President Carlos Andrés Perez. The coup fails. Chavez is arrested, but they make a fatal mistake. They let him speak on live television. For exactly 1 minute, Chavez looks into the camera and says the coup's objectives were not achieved. Quote, por ahora. For now. Por ahora, for now. Those two words made him a folk hero overnight. Here was someone willing to fight the corrupt elite. Someone from the people. A man of action, not words. 6 years later, Chavez wins the presidency in a landslide. And here's what's important to understand. He didn't win because Venezuelans wanted socialism. He won because the alternative was more of the same corruption that had destroyed their country for 40 years. People don't vote for revolution. They vote against the system that failed them. Chavez understood something fundamental about power. Give people an enemy. Give them someone to blame, the oligarchs, the Americans, the old corrupt parties, and then position yourself as the savior, the protector, the voice of the voiceless. It's the oldest political playbook in history, and it works every single time. Desperate people don't choose ideology. They choose the loudest voice promising change. But what Chavez built wasn't a revolution. It was a new kind of trap. And understanding that trap reveals something far more disturbing. Socialist mirage. Chavez gets into power and immediately rewrites the Constitution, extends presidential terms, packs the courts, takes control of the military. Classic authoritarian playbook dressed up in revolutionary language. Then comes the economics. Price controls on everything. If bread costs too much, make it illegal to charge more. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Bakers can't cover their costs. They stop making bread. Shortage. He nationalizes over 1,000 private companies, oil service firms, farms, factories, banks, telecommunications, puts military officers and political loyalists in charge. People who know nothing about running a business. Production drops, quality vanishes. But it doesn't matter because oil prices are skyrocketing again. From 2003 to 2008, oil goes from $30 to nearly $150. Money is pouring in. Chavez uses it to fund massive social programs, called them missions. Misión Barrio Adentro for healthcare. Misión Robinson for literacy. With enough oil money, even a broken system can look like it's working. And to be fair, poverty did decrease during the oil boom years. People had food, medicine, housing, but none of it was sustainable. It was all funded by oil, not by a productive economy. not by real growth, by a commodity price that could crash at any moment. The prosperity was a mirage, and the man who built it was about to leave the stage at the worst possible moment. Maduro's disaster. Hugo Chavez dies of cancer in March 2013. His handpicked successor, Nicolás Maduro, a former bus driver and union organizer with zero economic training, inherits a ticking time bomb, and the timer is about to hit zero. In 2014, oil prices crash, from over $100 a barrel to below 30. For a country where oil funds 96% of export revenue, this isn't a recession. This is an extinction-level economic event. Maduro's response: print money. When you can't pay your bills, just create more currency. The result is predictable to anyone who's ever opened an economics textbook. Hyperinflation, not the 5 or 10% kind. The kind measured in millions of percent per year. Million percent inflation. In 2018, Venezuela's inflation rate hit 1 million percent. A cup of coffee that cost 1 bolivar in 2017 cost 1 million bolivars a year later. People carried cash in wheelbarrows, then stopped carrying cash entirely because it was worthless. Your savings, your pension, your life's work evaporated overnight. The government solution: remove zeros from the currency. They did it 3 times, knocked off 14 zeros total, as if removing numbers from banknotes removes the problem. But hyperinflation was just the beginning of the nightmare. Humanitarian hell. By 2017, Venezuela is in full collapse. Not economic decline, collapse. Hospitals have no medicine. Surgeons perform operations without anesthesia. Children die from treatable diseases because there are no antibiotics. 1. 80% of Venezuelans in food poverty. 2. Average weight loss of 26 pounds per person. 3. Child malnutrition, up over 400%. 4. Over 7 million refugees fled the country. 7 million. That's the largest displacement crisis in the Western Hemisphere's modern history. Larger than the Syrian refugee crisis in sheer numbers. Where did they go? Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Chile, Brazil, walking, many of them walking across borders with nothing. Doctors became street vendors. Engineers begged for food. Professors crossed mountains on foot carrying their children. We didn't leave Venezuela. Venezuela left us. And here's what makes it even more enraging. While the people starved, the military elite and political inner circle lived in luxury. Maduro was caught on camera eating a steak dinner at a celebrity chef's restaurant in Istanbul, while his people ate from trash cans. The Maduro regime didn't just fail to help, they actively blocked humanitarian aid at the borders, burned aid trucks, shot at civilians trying to bring food in. This wasn't incompetence anymore. This was something far more calculated. Holding power. Here's the question everyone asks. If it's this bad, why doesn't the government fall? Simple. Because the system isn't designed to serve the people. It's designed to keep power. Control. Military survival. Maduro controls the military by giving generals access to mining operations, drug trafficking routes, and food distribution monopolies. Why would they overthrow a government that makes them rich? The intelligence services, trained by Cuban advisors, monitor dissent at every level. Neighbors report neighbors. Protest leaders disappear. Independent media is shut down or driven underground. Elections still happen. On paper, Venezuela is a democracy. In reality, opposition candidates are jailed, banned, or exiled. Voting machines are questioned. International observers are expelled. The most dangerous dictatorships are the ones that still pretend to be democracies. In 2019, Juan Guaido declared himself interim president. Over 50 countries recognized him. The United States backed him. The European Union backed him, and nothing happened. Because recognition without enforcement is just a press conference. Maduro stayed. Guaido eventually left the country. The international community watched a democracy die in real time and did nothing effective to stop it. But here's what this story really teaches us. And it's the lesson that applies far beyond Venezuela's borders. The warning. Venezuela's collapse isn't unique, it's a pattern, and it follows the same steps every single time. Step 1. Discover or develop a major source of wealth. Step 2. Let the government control that wealth instead of distributing opportunity. Step 3. Use that wealth to buy political loyalty instead of building institutions. Step 4. When the wealth dries up, print money and blame foreigners. Step 5. When people protest, tighten control. The road from prosperity to tyranny is paved with good intentions and bad institutions. Look at Argentina. Look at Zimbabwe. Look at Lebanon. Different continents, different cultures, same pattern, same destruction. And it's not about left or right. It's about institutions. Countries with strong, independent courts survive bad leaders. Countries with free press catch corruption before it metastasizes. Countries with term limits and real elections can course correct. Venezuela had none of these safeguards, and the people paid the price. Right now, today, there are countries weakening their courts, silencing their press, extending their leaders' terms, centralizing economic control. Every nation is 3 meals away from a revolution. But every revolution is one strongman away from a dictatorship. The question isn't whether it can happen again. It's whether you'll recognize the pattern before it's too late. Venezuela had everything: oil, location, a skilled population, international goodwill, and they lost it all, not because of an invasion, not because of a natural disaster, because of choices. Choices made by leaders who valued power over people. Choices made by institutions too weak to stop the rot. Choices made by a society that traded long-term stability for short-term handouts. Choices matter always. And the scariest part, the people who destroyed Venezuela genuinely believed they were saving it. That's the trap. That's what makes this pattern so dangerous. It doesn't come wearing a villain's mask. It comes wearing the face of a savior. So look at your own country. Look at your own institutions. Are the courts independent? Is the press truly free? Are leaders held accountable, or just the ones from the other side? Because Venezuela didn't collapse overnight. It took decades of small erosions, each one explained away, each one justified, until one day the richest country in South America became a place where mothers can't feed their children. If you made it this far, comment Petro State if you'll never look at oil-rich nations the same way again. Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about? The truth is out there. You just have to follow the money. Subscribe if you want to keep digging.